who were not a million miles away from where I live in Stoke-on-Trent, of course, playing a town called Burslem. I saw a fantastic, gripping League One match, just a real testament to the depth and the quality of English football at Vale Park. More than 9,000 people there playing in a monsoon. Mansfield Town had a player sent off very early on in the game. So it was very cagey, cat and mouse, Port Vale trying to play around them and find the opening. First half wasn't fantastically exciting as a result, but Darren Moore, a former baggy, changed it up in the second half, made two half-time substitutions. He was bold and started trying to get behind the Mansfield defence a little bit. And that really did open up the game. Port Vale scored, took the lead. You then think, well, this is going to be 2 or 3 now to the home team. Mansfield, incredibly, with 10 men, fought back and scored an astonishing equaliser 5 minutes from time. And their fans at the far end, there were 1,800 Mansfield fans there, went absolutely wild, thinking they'd secured the draw against all the odds. And then, in time added on, and this is what I want to talk about, a controversial penalty. I mean, the pitch was so wet, splashing around. It was real weather for ducks in the Potteries. And the ball's knocked into the penalty area. Port Vale striker chases it down. He's being pursued by a Mansfield defender. The arm goes into the back. The Vale player goes over. To me, straight away, stonewall penalty. My mates are going, really? You know, it's just the weather. Slight touch, of course, but he goes down very easily. Anyway, the referee agrees with me, gives the penalty, from which Port Vale score the decisive goal and end up, of course, mocking their poor old Mansfield compatriots at the far end of the ground. It was just a glorious afternoon of classic English lower division football. But the promptness of the VAR and the relative lack of complaint from the Mansfield players, given the injustice they felt that had been served on them, was in marked contrast to the game we then watched in the pub afterwards in Port Vale, in Burslem, when Manchester United were playing Chelsea. And I'm sure you're aware, Charlie, Manchester United scored a goal, Bruno Fernandes, that was then subject to VAR for a possible offside. And that decision seemed to take ages. Of course, no VAR in League One, where the decision was done and dusted and the game won in that instance. But in the Premier League, where VAR, I remember, Charlie, was introduced for clear and obvious errors by the referee, it took ages for the referee to decide that United's first goal was legitimate. And yeah, the right decision was probably reached, but something of the spirit of football for me is lost in those moments. I don't necessarily object to VAR if it is really for clear and obvious errors, but if stuff is taking more than 20 seconds to review, that error to me is not clear and obvious. Where do you stand as somebody who sees football in the round, you know, across the world now on VAR?
I've always been an opponent. It sounds great. It sounds great. And by the way, goal line technology, that's straightforward, right?
Yeah,
That's not even VAR. That's just a little beep on the referee's watch that says the ball crossed the line. That's the long and the short of it. And that's entirely objective, measurable scientifically, no problem at all with that. That's just using technology to prevent what would be scientifically an incorrect decision. But most of these other things,
100% on that, Charlie. Yeah.
most of these other things are to some degree or another, as you've just reflected on, subjective. And the irony is that the tighter the call, and therefore the less relevant it is to a clear and obvious error, the longer it's going to take, right? Because it's close. And this is where the problem of the whole thing lies. It's even the decision about what do you mean by clear and obvious error becomes a subjective thing in its own right. So once you've accepted that there is a degree of subjectivity to decision making in football, why not just leave it with the people on the field? Over the course of the season, these decisions will mostly more or less even out, or certainly over the course of 1, 2, 3 seasons. But we have to think about what, you know, it's a sort of risk reward here, right? Which is the reward being of VAR that perhaps a few dodgy decisions might not get made. But let's look at what's lost. What's lost is huge because effectively, my view and professional football as a spectator sport has always been that large chunks of the game are basically quite dull, right? Unless you're a video analyst looking at it from a purely professional point of view, as you said, during the first half in your game yesterday, large chunks of the game of football are quite cat and mouse. Not an awful lot happens. The ball goes here, the ball goes there, but there's not an awful lot happening in terms of goal mouth activity. So what you're waiting for in a game which is by definition a low scoring game, unlike basketball, unlike American football and these types of things, or unlike rugby, unlike cricket, it's a low scoring game. So what you're waiting for is that moment that lifts you off your seat. And that moment that lifts you off your seat is the moment of celebration that your team or the team that you're following in that game have just scored a goal. And you can let yourself go with total abandon. Yes, come on, we've scored. Fantastic. That game on, or whatever it might be. To take that away from the game and to replace it with a 2 to 3 to 4 minute period when everyone's losing that adrenaline rush, everything's calming down, and then some bloke in a studio applies his own subjective opinion as to whether this goal was or wasn't good. For me, the risk reward isn't there. The reward of what you're stopping is not enough for what you're losing. And it's now been going 5 years or whatever it might be, and I just don't think it's worked. And sometimes when something hasn't worked, it's best to just track back and say, okay, we now know what this is good for. We understand it, right? And I would say it's two things: goal line technology, number one; number two, checking for penalty decisions, right? Because effectively, the penalty decision, the game has stopped anyway. It's not yet a goal, so you're not celebrating the goal yet. So you're not taking away that big adrenaline rush. Of course, there's a bit of a celebration when you've been awarded a penalty. I understand that, but sometimes these things happen in very confined quarters, in very sort of tight situations, and the game has stopped. Right. So, in other words, and it doesn't just stop for a penalty. Let's be honest, it stops for a little while as the goalkeeper dicks around, sort of, trying to taunt the forward and the forwards. There's a lot of stuff going on. So there's time in there to say, right, when there is a penalty decision, there is then a 45-second check just to make sure it's not an egregious mistake, right? And that's part of the game. You're not stopping the game for any longer than you would normally be stopping it. You're just making sure that if it's been called for handball, it did actually hit the hand. If it's been called for a trip, it actually was a trip, right? So for me, that's okay. Goal line technology is okay. All the other stuff, forget it. Going back to look for an offside 2 or 3 phases of play before and all this type of stuff, it's just destroying not the spirit of the game. It's just destroying one of the key performative, spectator-friendly elements of the game, which is the adrenaline rush of scoring. Right, spectators, but for the players as well. That ability when you score a goal just to celebrate and go, that's fantastic. That's what I play this game for. So I'm passionately opposed to the widespread use of it.
Yeah, a lot of the arguments for it focus on, I suppose, one-off occasions. The moment, for example, when Thierry Henry's handball wins France a place in a World Cup finals and denies the Republic of Ireland that chance, or when Maradona handles the ball, the hand of God, against England. So I suppose those are the most egregious examples of play that isn't spotted by the referee, of fouls that are not spotted by the referee, where VAR could make a difference. So, and of course, we often hear the argument, don't we, that VAR costs can save, that without VAR, clubs on the wrong end of decisions can get relegated, can miss out on promotion. And from a business point of view, they will lose out on tens of millions of pounds. So it's
this
that
is
balance.
just all part. It's all just part of the game. It's like saying, well, we're going to try and stop injuries because an impact injury might cost somebody a game or whatever it might be. It's just like, I'm just not clear that this is all worthwhile. Probably another area where where you could use it potentially is to review a sending off, because sending offs for me destroy matches, really. That they change the entire nature of the game. And actually, generally speaking, I mean, notwithstanding what happened with you yesterday, generally speaking, sendings offs make games more boring for some reason in one way, shape, or form. One team goes into a very defensive formation, the other team has to then try and work out how to break them down. And it's a major, major thing. And again, the game has stopped, right? So for that moment, when the referee shows the red card, the game at that moment has stopped. So to take 45 seconds, and I would limit it always to 45 seconds, because that's what enables you to decide whether it is clear and obvious, right? If it's going to take you more than 45 seconds, it's not clear and obvious. So in the top levels of football, goal line technology, yes. A review of a penalty decision, yes. Not to give a penalty decision, but potentially to reverse an incorrect penalty decision. That's the point I'm making. And potentially to reverse an incorrect sending off, right? Those three things, when the game's already stopped, I mean, you're not changing the flow of the game, you're not stopping the adrenaline for other spectators, I'm okay with all that. But other than that, no. In the last few years, obviously, I've watched an awful lot of EFL football as of you. And I think it's interesting to me that overall the viewing numbers, both live and on TV, are increasing for the Football League at a greater extent than the Premier League. Why? Why is the Championship becoming one of the five most successful and watched leagues in Europe? I think the quality of the football is high enough, but it's not as technically good as the French league or whatever it might be, these types of things. What it has is, to a very high degree, a lot of jeopardy. Everything happens very quickly, and you are able to watch the flow of games in the EFL much more sort of successfully than you can in the Premier League, with all the stoppages and the breakages in play and that type of stuff. So I think this experiment's run long enough. I would get rid of it. What FIFA do in their own sort of global competitions, that's up to them. But it is in our control what happens within the English game, and I would say that we are losing that sense of spontaneous celebration, which is so important.
I agree with you, shockingly.